It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of a bank in formation. Take charge of your financial future with Your Personal Bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. Well, today I'm going to discuss my thoughts on this upcoming election, this midterm election, because it's going to be happening here very soon, depending on when you listen to this show. And I just want to share some of my general thoughts and what I feel is important. How's that? Obviously, depending on what happens, unlike, we've talked about many times before, I was not that involved. I should say this from a political standpoint until a couple of years ago or so, when, as I've stated many times, the COVID shutdowns, I just did not believe, and I still believe that today, that our federal government did not have the legal right to shut down businesses. And I just could not believe that our government would do that. Now, we've seen many, many things happen since then. And what I'm trying to get at, I suppose, here is I've never, a lot of people get frustrated with me talking about this or dealing with this, having to deal with it. I'm frustrated too. In fact, my own wife says, I get tired of you talking about the politics all the time. And I suppose, because I never used to, like I said, prior to 3 years ago. And I think it really boils down to, at least in my lifetime, I never lived in a scenario where the government had so much involvement with my life, and it impacted our lives in so many different ways. And that's what's changed. And I think from a big picture standpoint, the thing that I think is really important is the direction that our country goes is really going to be a very stark contrast. Do we continue down this path that we've been on for the last couple of years or so, where, again, the government is a major, major factor in our lives in terms of how we live, how we communicate, for example, how much we pay for things like food and fuel and many myriad of other things? Or do we go back to where the individual citizen, like our Constitution states, has a number of rights and freedoms, and we can reasonably expect to not have to deal with the government or have government interfere in our lives in a significant way most of the time? And I think that's the real big thing. And of course, the things that are on the ballot coming up are going to dramatically, from an economic standpoint, certainly, but also just from a lifestyle standpoint, the society that we live in, it will be different going forward. And I think this is a watershed moment, this midterm election. I really, truly believe that. I've heard many times this is the most important election of our lifetime, and many in the past over my lifetime have been important. But the stark contrast being offered this time, because of the actions that the current leadership and the current political party have put in front of us and forced us to deal with, okay? There is never been a more stark contrast. Is this, as I've stated many times, going to continue to be the land of freedom and opportunities, or are we going to move towards the land of dependency, and where we look to, the majority of people look to government for their basic well-being, to take care of them, if you will? Now, the directions that we go, there's going to be opportunities from an economic standpoint and financial standpoint. Obviously, either direction, they will be different, significantly different. But there will be opportunities going forward. So I'm not totally negative. Please understand, either way we go. But I certainly have a preference, a strong preference. Now, if you want to contact me on how to navigate this going forward, either direction that we end up going, contact me at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com, because I'm going to share a lot of things, both political and economic, in this show. And you're going to see where, if you understand how your personal bank works, it's going to help you thrive through either scenario that we deal with going forward. Again, it'll be different and for different reasons, but it will help you not only survive, but actually thrive, increase your rate of return, reduce your taxes, gain more control over your money, all those kinds of things, which could be significantly more important as we go forward. Now, the big three things, I believe, that are on the ballot coming up here in this midterm election, it's far less about policy. I mean, it is about policies and personalities and things like that, but and even politics. It's really more, again, about the type of life we want to live. And the big three, of course, are fuel prices, inflation, and crime. And just about every poll you read and every person you talk to, no matter where they fall on the political spectrum, agree with those three things. And I think just nearly every person, every individual, I'm going to touch on these three things, hopefully if you have enough time today, but the one that's probably impacting us the most is fuel. The price of fuel increasing, which is also helping contribute to the inflation. So it sort of has a dual thing going on. And most everyone, I mean, every time you go to the gas station to purchase gas, you're reminded by how much more, that we're paying for fuel, far more than we were a couple of years ago, for example. But it gets, and it started, and I think most people realize this because it started because Biden's administration, day one, in a very high profile manner, made a big deal about shutting down the Keystone pipeline. Now, that in and of itself would have affected oil supplies and natural gas supplies to this country. But what doesn't make it in the media, and I've very rarely ever seen it, is something like 8 or 10 other pipelines were shut down on the same day. Okay, so when you shut down, say, a dozen or 10 pipelines, that will have an impact. There's just no two ways about it. And it's gone beyond that. It's gone beyond where the war on oil, the war on fuel, has been multifaceted from the Biden administration, from everything from not shutting down pipelines to not allowing land to be permitted and leased on the property. So reducing production, right? And that some of the latest things are things like the Biden administration has a math error having a real impact on offshore oil production. This is one of the latest, and this has been found to be a problem since something like back in May, according to the National Marine Fisheries Service. They're responsible for determining wildlife impacts on offshore energy projects. Well, guess what? Apparently there was a math error on the number of acres or whatever available for offshore drilling, and they even themselves determined that they made a math error. In other words, they were not allowing as many leases as they should, yet have done nothing about it yet. And this goes back to something like April or May of 2022. Here it is. It even states in a letter on April 29th, the administration stated that the agency would quickly fix it, and they haven't. This is we're in October. So again, it's not only just shutting down pipelines and having a negative, shutting down, investments to oil production things. It's things like just slow pacing, permits and things like that. It's just one thing after another. And of course, the most recent being, the release of the strategic oil reserve, which is designed for emergencies only. And what's really sad is our strategic oil reserve right now is at the lowest levels it's been since 1984. And it's only been tapped 3 times since it was created. And this is all administrations, all presidents, and all 3 of those times were significant emergencies, like the Gulf War was one of them. We had a interruption, obviously, with oil supplies because of war in the Gulf. And that's a purpose for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's what it's designed for. And to release 180 million barrels over a 6-month period and then another 10 million and another 15 million shortly before the midterm elections because gas prices are too high or uncomfortably high due to the policies that Biden administration has been pushing, and it's creating a political problem for them. You know, political problems for whoever's in charge is not an emergency. Now, obviously, they would argue otherwise because that's what they're doing, but it's a bad look. It's a really, really bad look. And like I said, voters, we need to remember this. The Biden administration has politicized something that no other administration previously would ever consider, and that's the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, our emergency supply in case we have a war or a major environmental impact or something, and we need fuel. In fact, just found out just recently that the United States now has a 25-day supply of diesel, apparently. And this is apparently according to the National Economic Council. Folks, that is not good news. Now, apparently they're working on doing some things to address some of that, but why would this country, a country who has built the strongest economic system in world history, has created more economic benefits and opportunity for more people than any other society in history. And that's a fact. That's an inarguable fact, okay? Why would we be sitting in a situation where we only have a 25-day supply of diesel fuel? And we're going into winter where many homes in the Northeast use diesel fuel for heating. And of course, diesel is what's used predominantly to transport just about every product that we purchase, including food, things that we absolutely need. This isn't luxuries, folks. This is basic survival type stuff. And it's all caused by the actions, disastrous actions of the energy policy that's been going on for now nearly 2 years. So I'm going to encourage you to go out and vote accordingly. If you want more of the same, then vote Democrat. But if you don't, if you think this country is going in the wrong direction, and well over 2/3 of Americans, something like 75%, believe that, you need to vote otherwise. I'm not necessarily a big fan of Republicans, but we need to change the direction. Contact me at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com for more info.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. And like I stated in the first segment, I'm really discussing some of my thoughts on this upcoming midterm election. I, again, believe this is the most consequential election in my lifetime in terms of direction that this country is headed. And I think there's three major things on the ballot, as I've stated earlier. It's fuel prices, the current administration's energy policy towards that cause these record fuel prices. Talked about that in the first segment. So if you missed it, go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows, by the way. The second one is inflation. And inflation is a big one because it's being caused partially by the high fuel prices, which is a significant impact because really it's quite simple. Nearly everything we purchase is transported, including basic things we need like food. And so when you increase the cost to move something or to build it, make it, manufacture it, it creates higher costs. So energy policy has a key cause to high inflation. But the other one is too much spending, because the spending is directly a definition of inflation. In other words, too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. And there's a number of things behind that we've talked about. But again, it comes back to a lot of the policies that the current administration is been foisting upon us. And that's why we're going to talk about that further here in a minute. But that's the problem is, like, this is an article from the committee. It's from the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, talking about sound fiscal policy is what's missing from the battle against inflation, as this report talks about. And the reality is, and the Federal Reserve has talked about this, has also made some statements to this effect, is they can continue to keep raising interest rates to curtail demand, but as long as there's still too many, in other words, as long as the government keeps spending too much money, one of the primary causes of inflation is still there. It's kind of like if you went into the doctor and you had emphysema. Well, the first thing the doctor is going to tell you to do is stop smoking, right? I mean, if you just keep smoking, you're going to have a hard time beating it. And essentially, that's the problem we're dealing with here, is elevated inflation because of too many federal dollars being pumped into the system, too much government spending. This is probably one of the most famous statements this show has, I get responses from, is the federal government and all governments, state, federal, local, have no money. And that's a key economic fact that a majority of Americans need to understand. Please understand, not everybody will, nor will everyone listen. That's okay. Fortunately, we're in a representative republic. We're not in a democracy. We're not in mob rule. That's what democracy means. We elect representatives to represent us and vote for us, and hopefully, the majority of the time they do so. And when they don't, then we vote them out, right? The reality is we only need 51%, right, to understand that the federal government, state, local governments have no money. Where do they get it from? Where do they get their spending? Two sources. One, taxpayers. Now, I'm going to say something a little controversial here, not politically correct, but I'm sorry, it's the fact. You know, I believe that those that don't have a skin in the game should not have the right to vote to determine how our government spends its money. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you don't pay any taxes and you just receive from the government, why should you have a vote on how the government spends its money? Because, one, it has no money. It gets it from taxpayers. And secondly, it gets it from printing dollars, which creates more inflation, which everyone has to deal with. You know, if you go back in your history, I believe the founding fathers had it right. And that is, one thing they had right here was you had to be a landowner to vote. And at the time, it wasn't considered unusual. In fact, most people, even those who did not own land, understood why should they vote. Because landowners that was the wealth at the time. That was the reality. And they were the people that had skin in the game and would have an influence on how their government would represent them. When you have a representative republic, you need to have skin in the game. So if you pay taxes, if you pay into the system, then you have the right to have a vote. I feel like that's absolutely correct. If you do not, if you just receive, you just take, why should you have a voice? Now, again, I know that's not I know that's politically popular, but let's be real. Let's boil it down to a household. You have parents and children, right? And when it comes to spending and the budget of how a household spends its money, for the most part, who determines how the money is spent? The parents or the children? Well, in most cases, obviously, it's the parents because they're the ones earning the income to have the money to spend, right? The children didn't contribute in any way in most cases. Why should they can share what they want? They can request, but should they have a vote at the table on how the family budget is spent? And the answer is no, they shouldn't. That's responsible. It's being fiscally responsible, okay? And we need a whole lot more of that in our government going forward if we're going to beat this inflation And that's one of the major things missing. And consider that when you're voting in this midterm election. Again, it's not about Republican and Democrat anymore, I don't believe. Is this representative likely to be more or less fiscally responsible with my money? And nearly everyone who votes is fiscally responsible, or if you would be broke. I mean, you'd be owing money. If you spent more than you made, you'd have lots of financial trouble, right? And again, even if you receive a majority or all of your money from the government, there are people like that, you still should be fiscally responsible with how the government spends its money, because if it wastes it or prints too much, that creates inflation, which all of us deal with, whether we pay taxes or not. This is a basic economics 101 lesson that the average American, or the majority again, need to understand. And so because there's overspending, we have high inflation. That's why the average 401k, for example, has lost a significant amount. For example, this last study, the average 401k in January 1st of 2022 had $135,000 in it in the United States. That same 401k is now just over $100,000. In other words, it's lost about 35% of its value. So if you're looking at your 401k statement and you've lost 35% since January 1 of this year, you have to ask yourself a simple question. Well, one, you're in the average. Okay, hopefully yours is not as bad. Some are worse. But do you want to see fiscal government decisions being made that affect your money, your retirement, and all that, while you have a government that's just denying and stating things like Biden, quote unquote, our economy is strong as hell, yet people are losing 35% in their 401ks, record inflation, record fuel prices. I don't think that equals strong as hell. Contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com to learn more about how to navigate this economic chaos we're dealing with.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show, and today we're discussing my thoughts on this upcoming midterm election and really what is on the ballot. And again, those are fuel prices, high inflation, and high crime. All three are at record or near record levels. And it really boils down to, it's not about Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal or anything like that anymore. These are basic kitchen table bread and butter issues. This is you going to the store and buying a loaf of bread or filling up your gas tank, or as many people are doing today, something like I saw this other study here, about half of adults are now considering second jobs to make ends meet. I've seen all other studies, things like stating that approximately 1/3 of Americans are 2 months behind on their utility bills. Folks, you're not behind on utility bills unless there's financial trouble. And winter's coming, and especially in places like in the Northeast that use a lot of fuel for their heating needs, prices are going to be higher than they've been in maybe ever, okay, but certainly in decades. You have also, I've seen studies showing that upwards of 70% of Americans today are tapping into savings to make basic ends meet. In other words, cover their food, housing, and clothing. Look, folks, as we go each month, this high inflation drags on month after month. More and more people will fall off the wagon, so to speak, run out of savings. And then what? And like I said, they're not making enough to pay for their basic living expenses. Something like 2/3, I've seen studies upwards of 70% of Americans. That is a lot of folks, okay? I stated in the last segment, recent studies showing the average 401k in the United States right now is down 35% from January 1 of this year. Now we're in that October. So in 10 months, they've lost 35% of their retirement savings. That's the average. There's some that are not as bad and some that are much worse. Folks, this is basic economic survival stuff. This is not conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, libertarian, or anything else like that. Think about that. Consider that. I saw somebody joke, and it's not a funny joke, but it's a good point, is every voter, when they go to vote, before they do so, whether it's you do it by mail or in person, you should go to the gas station to either mail in or go to vote and fill up your tank and get some groceries. And then maybe that'll remind you of why you want things to be different and to change. And it's very clear, as I stated in the first segment, most people understand the policies that the current administration has foisted upon the American public are not popular, and something like 75% of Americans state that this country is headed in the wrong direction in their opinion. I'm in that group. And if you feel that way, despite what the media says or anything else for that matter, you're in the majority. You're in a vast majority. And maybe you have never voted for a conservative or a Republican. But what you need to understand when you go vote is fiscal responsibility important? Do we need a government going out there and reducing energy supply, spending more money than we have, creating inflation, creating high gas prices, high fuel prices, high crime, allowing, the border to be open, which increases crime literally just about everywhere in this country? Are those the things that you want to continue? Do you want to live your life that way? Do you want your family and your kids and your grandkids to live that way, not only now, but in the future? I mean, many of these things, like with crime, we'll get into that in the next segment. I want to encourage you to stay tuned, are going to last for many, many years going forward, even if it'll take time to, even if it does get cleaned up, which I'm not certain that's going to happen yet, but it will take many, many years to clean up. And so I think it really boils down to that Clinton was right. It's the economy, stupid. People will vote, for the most part, pocketbook issues. And a lot of people, because of the policies, the fiscal discipline that has not existed whatsoever. It's not only that. There's no fiscal discipline at all or responsibility. They're just outright they're just ignoring it and trying to tell us and gaslight it that, as Biden said the other day, the economy is strong as hell, which is totally, totally not true. If you want to learn how to navigate this economic climate in whichever direction we go into going forward next year, contact me at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com, and I'll show you how to thrive, not just survive.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show, and I'm going to finish up today with what I started with. And again, that's thinking about what's important coming up in this midterm election and why you may want to vote perhaps in a different way than maybe you've ever voted before in your lifetime. Again, maybe you've never voted for a conservative or a Republican for that matter. But the issues that we're dealing with going forward this go around go far beyond conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, independent, or any of those other things for that matter. These are bread and butter, kitchen table issues. And the big three that are affecting most people, of course, are high fuel prices, high inflation, which is causing the cost of everything to be higher just about, and high crime. And really what I want you to do, this is what I'm asking you, not only for your, maybe you far down the path in your life that it doesn't matter too much anymore for you. and you have personal reasons or personality reasons where you prefer one candidate over another. But I would challenge you and ask you, I'm even begging you, to think about the future. And I'm thinking about this primarily, not only for myself, but all those people and our children and our grandchildren. What kind of society, what kind of country are we going to be living in the future? Do we want one where, again, the number one priority impact on our lives is government, the biggest impact, even in terms of like, what we spend for things like food and fuel? Okay. I can say this, we've always lived in what we consider a very safe neighborhood, and we live in an area, North Scottsdale, and I've seen for the first time, I've been here for well over 20 years, and for the first time ever, we've seen things like homeless people on the street. We've seen firsthand stalkers in the local Walmart. There's more and more of these kinds of things going on, and I know this may be normal in many neighborhoods, but I have a wife and 2 daughters that are very sensitive to that. Due to various factors, and like particularly my wife, with history with her growing up when she was young, she's very sensitive to those kinds of things. And we're hearing and seeing more and more stories of this firsthand, not in the news reports so much, just it's where we live is changing because we are feeling the effects of so many people coming in from the border, from the southern border, and from the California border. Where we live is not the same as where it used to be. And as my wife said, she doesn't feel as safe as she used to because crime is up, and that's a statistical fact. And why is that? Well, we can, again, just like we talked about before, the current administration policies, where we were talking about things like their energy policy causing high fuel prices by reducing demand, and they're spending, particularly in that last round, spending another $1.9 trillion, for example, on the American Rescue Plan, and when there was still $1 trillion that had not been spent from the previous COVID relief. Most people instinctively understand when you spend those kinds of dollars, record amounts, that's going to lead to inflation. But also having things like, we had the most secure border, the lowest illegal border crossing numbers in 40 plus years in the previous administration. Whether you like the guy or not, that's a statistical fact. And now we've had the highest record in the last 2 years. They're now saying something like 4.5 million illegals have crossed our border, southern border. Those are the documented ones. So that there's many that they didn't see or catch. So I have to believe that, conservatively speaking, we've seen 5 million plus new illegals cross the border over the last 2 years, less than 2 years, because of the policies, the lax policies, not enforcing the laws that are on the books, frankly, folks. If our Department of Homeland Security was actually doing their job and enforcing the rules that are on the books, we wouldn't have those numbers. And I'm not against immigration. My gosh, I'm half Hungarian, and my dad immigrated from this country in '56 after escaping the Soviets. I'm a big fan of immigration, and in fact, this country was built upon that. But he did it the right way. And our country knew who was coming in. And we are still the land of opportunity, still. Hopefully that will remain. And how we vote in this midterm election, I believe, is going to have a big impact on how that's going to go going forward. Again, whether we're going to continue to be the land of opportunity or be more of a land of dependency, where we have a majority of the people dependent upon the government who has no money. Because, again, they get it from where? Taxpayers, or print it. And, let me point this other thing out. I'm getting off track a bit, but I think this is so important. When you have a government that spends recklessly, has no fiscal responsibility, And I think fiscal responsibility is so important and is so key because nearly everyone has to be fiscally responsible. When you're not, you owe too much money and you owe too many bills. It causes serious problems, right? When you have a government that spends recklessly and you and I have to, we can't do that. Those of us that are contributing to the system, those of us that do pay taxes, it's an incredibly discouraging factor. It makes you wonder, why should you work so hard to then have a good chunk of that money go to the government for them to just spend it recklessly or outright waste it? You know, and I'm going to expand upon this thought a little bit further because this is something that really doesn't talked about a lot, but needs to be considered. Because you see things, I see an article here where it talks about the State Department. Now, this is a small thing, please understand, but this makes a point. The State Department is awarding a grant to Ecuador, the country of Ecuador, in Central America, for a cultural center to host drag shows in the South American country. Now, the grant's like $20,000. It's not a lot of money. But the problem is our government does this times thousands of times. Why should our federal government be giving, in my opinion, why should we be giving any money to Ecuador? What benefit are we as citizens getting? I have a hard time really understanding or believing what interest is it in the U.S. government for us to be giving any money to Ecuador, for that matter, much less to a cultural center to host drag shows. You kind of see my point. You know, and a lot of people are against this whole thing about, the student loan bailout. I mean, these are all things that cost taxpayers money. You know, if you take myself personally, many people who pay taxes happen to be business owners and entrepreneurs, just like myself. And I'm in a position, fortunately, and I'm blessed, that I can kind of determine my income to a degree by how hard I work. And many business owners are that way. It depends on how much business you do, how many contacts you reach out to, prospective clients, all that kind of stuff. And of course, typically, the harder you work, if you're good at what you do, the more people you reach out to, obviously, the more business you'll do, the more profit you'll make, and therefore the more taxes you'll pay, I should say. And when you see things like this, it's extremely discouraging. So here's what I'm sending this message not only out to all the entrepreneurs and business owners and self-employed and independent contractors, but people who work regular jobs need to understand this. People who receive funds from the government need to understand this. A percentage of us are just going to say this continues. We're just going to say it's not worth it. And so I'll work a little less hard. I'll do a little less business, maybe do a lot less business, therefore owe less taxes. Therefore, there's less money in the system. If you discourage the producers enough, which is what is happening, they're just going to sit on their hands and say, it's not worth it. I'm going to step back. I'm not going to do as much. And there's nothing anyone can do about that. It's not like you can force us to go to work, right? I don't have a boss, okay? And that's why I guess what's encouraging going forward, and I'll finish on a few positive thoughts. There's a lot of really good things to be encouraged about. And what I'm going to say is I'm actually very, very excited about this midterm election because I have faith in the American people. I have faith in the idea of America being the land of opportunity. It was for my father, who escaped the Soviets in Hungary and gave himself a better life, and for his family, I wasn't even born yet. I was born here. But it gave me the opportunity to live in a land that gave me the opportunity to do with what I want. And so what we need going forward is people who understand what this country was founded on, what we're about, and what opportunities we have. We don't need to be like everyone else. We are different and can continue to be different if we choose to do so. Our founding fathers, through the Constitution and the freedoms of the Bill of Rights, gave us tremendous freedoms and the opportunity to accomplish something great if we're so inclined. So what we need is people to realize that, vote accordingly. Vote for the fiscal conservative. Fiscal conservatism, I shouldn't say fiscal responsibility, actually, needs to be a primary factor in our government. Vote the candidate who's going to spend less money of our money, not theirs. The government has no money, right? And we can push on them further to spend even less and stop creating inflation. Vote for the candidate that's going to give us the fuel independence that we need to avoid all this ridiculously high prices and dependence on foreign energy sources, many who are our enemies. That's ridiculous. And vote for the candidate who's going to protect us. If a government doesn't protect us from crime, what's the purpose of that government? Let's face it, what do we really need them for? So it's those kinds of things, and we need leaders to step up, and we've got some of those coming up, like strong governors, ones that'll stand up to, like the Ron DeSantis has become very famous and popular as a result because he stood up to the federal government on many fronts, okay, by many people. We don't need the type of leaders. Well, for example, you got Senator Murkowski who says she'll vote for the Democrat running against Sarah Palin. It's because she's got a personal vendetta or issue with Sarah Palin. And you may like or dislike her. I don't really care. That's not important. But we don't need any more of these personal vendettas. It's not Senator Murkowski, what I would say to her is, you are supposed to represent the people of your state as a senator. She's from Alaska, which is a very conservative state. Represent your people. Do your job. And if they don't do their job, like we have in Arizona here, Mark Kelly's current senator, who votes 96% of the time with the Biden administration. In my opinion, he's not representing the interests of most Arizonans. If they don't do their job, vote them out. Don't reward them by allowing them to serve another term. Vote them out. Get somebody else and give them an opportunity to make a difference. And if they don't do the job, we'll vote them out too. If we send those messages, that's the one thing that you can be confident about politicians. They want to be elected and they want to be reelected. And if they feel like their job's in jeopardy, they will actually start to listen. Contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com for more information on how to navigate this economic chaos that we're dealing with. And going into these midterm elections, I'm going to say this: I believe in the American people, and in God we trust.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and writers may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.